Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Batchelder. I'm so excited to welcome today's guest, Dr. Zann. She's a perinatal mental health expert, doula, lactation consultant, and a clinical psychologist based in California. Most importantly, she's a dear friend who has supported me through some of the toughest moments of motherhood. And we actually gave birth just a week apart from each other. We have texted at 3 a.m. throughout the night, just navigating the highs and lows of new motherhood, and I've always felt accepted and loved by her. So I'm thrilled to have her here to share her wisdom, to showcase her new work and her new private practice. Let's just take it away. Dr. Zann, what led you to pursue a career in perinatal mental health? And I would just love to know more about your life background and how this has
Yeah,
influenced your approach.
yeah, of course. This is personal endeavor as much as it is a professional one. In grad school, we're all trying to figure out what is our niche, what are we interested in, what is our ideal client population, while also working on our dissertation. I found myself doing some research for something like a completely different topic. And at the same time, I was hearing a lot in the news about the Black maternal mortality crisis in the United States. And for folks that aren't aware, Black folks in the United States who give birth are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related cause than white people. And a lot of that has to do with systemic and interpersonal racism. And so like learning about that and how likely it could have been to die in childbirth really kind of like shook me. I wasn't even planning to get pregnant at the time, but I knew that eventually I wanted to. And so it was a weird kind of time where I found myself doing more research on that than on my dissertation
Interesting.
to the point where I was like, you know what, I should maybe merge the two. Like, I'm already spending my days and my nights doing research
Mhm.
on this thing. Why don't I make this like my academic research also? So that's kind of where I kind of merged the personal and the professional, and started doing my own research on Black maternal mortality, on the impact of doulas on Black people who give birth. And so that's kind of just like how it began. And then from there, I decided that I wanted to do my own doula training to see what this was really about. It started as a kind of like part of my research, but I got really interested in it. Yeah, everything sort of like snowballed from there. I went from
Mhm.
doing a doula training to a lactation educator training to starting to see more perinatal clients. Um, yeah, it's very much both like professional and personal for me.
It's so powerful. It's always inspiring to me when I meet psychologists who share how their personal experience shaped the work they do. And we know that that passion fuels us, but we also know that burnout can be higher there too.
Absolutely.
Going through it yourself from a researcher, but also as a mother, what do you see as some of the biggest mental health challenges for women during the perinatal period? And how do you help women throughout
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the biggest struggles is this like feeling of loneliness.
Mm,
And some of it is like real, like actual real loneliness, but then some of it's also like this perceived loneliness, this
see.
feeling that like you are the only one going through the struggle that you're going through, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that what we know about being alone is that that's where shame sort of can build and fester and grow. And shame is horrible for depression and for suicidality and anxiety, right? It just fuels it. And so I experienced it myself. I see it with clients all the time, this feeling of, oh, wow, I must be the only one going through this. This is so bad. Not realizing that so many people around the world are going through such similar experiences, and there like actually is a strong community for you.
Mhm. Absolutely. There's so much pressure on new parents just starting, not even before pregnancy, just being
Oh yeah.
born a female and to provide and be perfect, and a lot of, especially in this aspect of life of
Hmm.
motherhood, martyrdom is definitely a real thing. And I've learned that, being Asian American and kind of just like seeing some of the roles that got passed down. Or I think about how moms are kind of learning now, maybe for the first time, that they can let go of those unrealistic
Yeah.
expectations. And sometimes there's pushback, maybe if there's a partner who doesn't agree with that or who wasn't ready for that either. And
Hmm.
so how do we help moms reframe that mindset that they aren't alone, but also that they can advocate for themselves, they can take matters into their own hand, especially I don't know, seeking a mental health therapist, because we know, right, in our communities, especially women of color, they're less likely to seek help. What are some
Right.
ways we can actually improve that?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you brought in like the idea of partners who may not understand or like other folks in people's life. I think that something that I see a lot is the older generation maybe not
Mm,
understanding, where moms and birthing people are coming from. So like your own mother or your own
mm,
mother-in-law or, you know what I mean? Like other people who are older and who have parented, but parented differently,
mm,
parented without seeking out the support because they didn't have as many resources as we have now. And so sometimes people see moms and birthing people as like weak almost for needing support or for really acknowledging what they're going through, like acknowledging the depression, like actually allowing themselves to feel it and seek help for it. People can be like shamed for that. And so I think that the one like number one piece is I guess like pushing through some of that shame and some of that stigma in order to get help, educating those around you, which is hard to do when it's in the moment, right?
oh
But
yeah.
like having that education kind of allow some of that like stigma to dissipate a bit. And so something that I kind of advocate for folks is to try to prepare yourself before even getting pregnant, right? Start to learn about perinatal mental health disorders before you get pregnant or in early pregnancy so that it's not, postpartum when you're really in the thick of it and you're having to
Mm,
try to explain it to your partner or to your mom or something, right? Like you have already educated yourself and educated others around you about what could happen and like what signs to look out for so that they're actually supporting you when it comes the time for you to actually seek the help, right? You don't have to be pushed up against that barrier of having to educate and like work through people in your life who don't understand.
yeah, that's a really good point. For me, educating was so important to the people around me, and I might have went a little bit too hard in terms of educating people too. So I love the reminder of balancing it as well. What's
Hmm.
so great about social media is pages like your own that are educating, but in kind of in a fun way, in like short little snippets, things that people can relate to, for people who have given birth, but also for their partners, but specifically your representation, Black maternal mental health, because people want to work with a provider who looks like them, who has lived experience. I was just thinking of in some of my work, someone saying, wow, I'm so glad I found you. I feel like I'm being gaslit, or I feel like I'm,
Mm.
man, I have felt disregarded and dismissed from my medical providers, even my therapist too. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. And so doing this work is so important, but also it's also challenging too if you've gone through it yourself. So this is more kind of a personal question. Actually, I'll rewind for a second because I scrolled to the first message we exchanged with each other, trying to remember, when did we meet? How did we
Yeah.
meet? It was on Instagram, our professional Instagram sites. I think we must have added each other at the beginning of the
Yeah.
pandemic. I was
Hmm.
like, I want to start my page, and maybe through some connections, we both went to grad school in the Bay Area, which is cool, but we
Hmm.
never met each other during that time. Though I almost went to the Right Institute. That was
Oh, really?
almost,
I didn't realize that.
I really loved it. I wanted to live in Berkeley or Oakland, and that was like my dream, but I was in Palo Alto. It was a completely different experience. But the first message was on, wow, it's so nice to meet another therapist who's also pregnant. And you're like, oh my goodness, I'm 11 weeks. I'm like, wait, I'm 7. I was like, how are you doing this? So I saw some of her messages, and it was about how we're managing being pregnant, going through the challenges of it while also holding space for our own clients. And also remembering myself at that time, how deeply integrated I was to providing and helping, because I could
Hmm.
really feel it the way I never could before. And so I'm just curious, how do you balance your own, because I need advice there too.
Well, I mean, it's something that we kind of all are going through kind of like all the time. I think that there are ways that
Mm,
we have shared identities and experiences with our clients and the people that
mm-hmm,
we support. I mean, you talked earlier about like being an Asian American therapist, and like there are experiences of racism that you have that are probably similar to your clients' experiences of racism
mm,
too, right? Like we're kind of going through it together and having to navigate what that's like, right? To have the same
Mm-hmm.
experiences as your clients. I mean, one thing is having my own therapy. That
Mm-hmm.
is quintessential. But I love that you went through our text messages because I would say that that was really kind of what saved me through it. Like having those like close connections and close friendships with people who are also going through it, like going through parenting and going through the struggle of parenting, but also doing that while being a therapist. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like a rarer sort of like subgroup of people.
Sure.
And to be able to have friends and community that are also going through that, who I could text at 3 a.m. and be like, my baby's not sleeping, I'm exhausted, and I have a client tomorrow at 9. I don't know what to do. And you being like, me too, girl.
Me too.
Right. That
It
like that
was
really
very
saved me.
similar. It was amazing how similar our experiences are. And like on our, personal note here, but this does tie back to our maternal mental health regarding sleep and the importance of sleep, which I would love to hear more about from your end too.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we know, and I'll say this from my background, doing sleep research, that was a big thing. I was so excited to get this job at Stanford, doing sleep studies and helping people improve their sleep and seeing how it had an impact on their mental health. So I
Mm-hmm.
was already passionate about it going in. I didn't necessarily have a plan. And so if I could go back, I would have had a plan with my partner, with other help and night doula. I would have just plan a little bit better because we know that sleep has such a big impact on our mental health. And you don't know what kind of baby you're going to get. You don't know if your
You
baby
really
is.
don't.
And I could say this right as a mother, fraternal twins, where one child pretty early on started sleeping through the night when the other one didn't sleep through the night until 14 months. And he still doesn't sleep through the night. Right? He's
Mm-hmm.
2. And I know Dr. Zann has gone through the same thing. But
Absolutely.
and it can be so isolating because you will see things, and this goes for a lot of other things in motherhood, milestones and different progressions, and seeing other people be rested when you're like, wait, that's not happening for me. I don't even see the light at the end of the tunnel. This feels
Mm-hmm.
like hell. I think when mental health providers say, hey, a lot of this sounds like you're just not getting enough sleep, because we're 2 providers who didn't get sleep, and getting more sleep wasn't an option for
Right.
over a year. What can people do actually?
Yeah, I think that like one thing to validate for them is like, yeah, I think that part of it is that you're not getting enough sleep. The sleep would change the game for you in a lot of ways.
Mm,
And just like be real about the fact that it's really difficult to get the sleep that you need right now. And helping and support around that, like that
mhm.
reality, because that reality in and of itself can be what's daunting, can be what leads to the depression, right? Like the knowledge that I can't get enough sleep right now, and that's something that I'm grieving. Like just being able to like sit in that space with folks can be validating in and of itself. But I would also say to just like find ways to support people around sleep. So if you're not able to get the sleep that you need, there may be other ways that things can be taken off your plate so that you're not exhausted and having to deal with,
That's a good point.
figuring out your meal plan for the week, or like
Hmm.
picking up your other kid from school or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
What can be taken off your plate so that your exhausted brain doesn't have to do all of that extra work. Because
absolutely.
yeah, your brain is going to be exhausted if you're not able to get the sleep. Like how can we support you around that?
Got it. Okay. Asking for help. Super important. What do you say to people who have a hard time asking for help, or people who ask for help but they get pushback? Um,
Mhm.
I know that stuff.
I know it's hard. I mean, when it comes to having difficulty asking for help, I feel like that is such a common issue. That's such a common problem. The way that I work therapeutically is like I come from like attachment and psychodynamic lens. So I look at kind of like lifetime experiences and how it impacts you now and how you interact with yourself and other people.
Mhm.
And so I like usually will go back in time with folks a little bit and just like try to understand their history of asking for help, like what were messages that they received as kids around doing things yourself versus asking for help. What did they see their parents do or not do? Like I come from an immigrant background, and lots of folks that come from immigrant families saw their parents not ask for help, like have to do things themselves. And so like
Right.
that could be ingrained within them without them even realizing it. So kind of getting at the root of, okay, like what is actually making it difficult to ask for help, and like how can we work on that and have a better understanding of that. So that's kind of how I work with the individual. When it comes to like the people in their life that don't understand or like, provide some pushback around it, that's a little bit harder. Because like again, it kind of goes back to the education piece of like, what do they think is actually happening for you right now? Why do they think that you shouldn't be asking for help? I'm kind of getting a better understanding and maybe having some curiosity about where it is that they're coming from and where they need to be educated a little bit more,
Okay, that's really well said and applicable too. If we push too hard, we're going to push people away. So you find yourself balancing, and like it shouldn't really be the burden on the person who gave birth to get the support and love and validation that they deserve. But I love the idea that there are going to people out there who can
For
support you,
sure.
even if it's not in your own home. And so what's so wonderful about the internet is just like our connection or just these spaces that are great. And there's a lot of great resources. And I'm so excited to include yours and more in the show notes here. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your background in all these different identities, especially as a doula. First, I was just going to ask, did you do your doula training while you were also in grad school?
I did.
What? First, I was like trying to make that connection. Like, you did that before? You did that? How did you even have the time for that? That's amazing.
I know. It was like early on in the pandemic where we were just like at
Cool.
home all the time. And I just like I had a little bit more space to do that, maybe because I wasn't like commuting.
Yeah.
Like I had some space to do the virtual doula training. Yeah, I could never do that now. I could never do that while
Still, that's
simultaneously
amazing.
doing grad school.
That's amazing. This is, again, I'm just coming up with some of these questions. How did, okay, how do I word this? To go through those experiences, see people's birthing experience, also know all the stats and data on maternal mortality, Black women specifically. How did you kind of experience your own fear and still go through with it? That's incredible. How did you not get scared away is the way I'm asking.
Right. I mean, I was terrified. I really was terrified. Yeah.
Mm.
Sometimes ignorance really is bliss,
I know. I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, there is like maybe a little bit of like knowing too much sometimes. And I did feel that during pregnancy. Like I was pretty anxious, like more so than most pregnant people are. And I think that I'm glad that you're kind of bringing this up because I think that that's something that can also be dismissed for folks.
Yeah.
Like people who have very real reason to be scared, like Black people or people who've had previous birth trauma or who've witnessed or whose parents have had previous birth trauma, right? Like they have legitimate anxiety that might just be dismissed by folks, like as them just being hormonal because they're pregnant or whatever, right? But yeah, my experience was I was a highly, highly anxious pregnant person. And I really did need extra support and extra holding around that. It shouldn't be that way. Like I wish that the circumstances weren't such that like I had to be as anxious as I was. But the reality was, and the reality is that I was at greater risk as a Black person and my anxiety was valid and real. And so like being able to just like acknowledge that and be told that I and my feelings are valid was so meaningful to me.
Knowing too much is such a real thing. I think as mental health providers, like I still am flabbergasted by the fact that I knew what the warning signs were. I knew what the risk factors were for postpartum depression specifically. I actually thought I knew for a fact I was going to have postpartum anxiety. I prepared for that as an anxiety expert. I was like, I know all the tools, but that didn't happen. It was depression, and that caught me off guard. But I'm still shocked by how it felt like the rug was just pulled, and I didn't think I thought I had a good landing place. So that's part of why I'm so passionate about working with new parents. I work as a couples therapist, so it's really fascinating to also have couples who are new to the experience and also have the experience, because wow, what a toll parenthood has on a relationship, even with the best foundations, like even with the best friendship,
it's gonna rock you like no matter what.
So I'm thinking like there's so many things that people have to be afraid of when getting pregnant. First, just getting pregnant, and then pregnancy, and then postpartum. It's scary. It's overwhelming. It's great that there's so much information so people can be prepared. But how do we help people who are overwhelmed by all the things that can go wrong in pregnancy and childbirth? Where can we start with that?
Yeah. I think that something that's really great, like maybe about the internet and about
Hmm.
communities, is that just as much information as there is about the ways that pregnancy can go wrong, there's also a ton of information about how it could go right. One thing that really helped with me was I went to my doula and told her about so many of the fears that I was experiencing, so many of my anxieties, and she was like, "What if I sent you some birth stories of people who had the various conditions that you have and actually went well?" And
Oh,
that
cool.
was like such a beautiful offering. Like I was able to read up on people who had gestational diabetes or who had,
Hmm.
this or that experience and who had lovely and beautiful births, right? Like there's a way that you can sort of combat some of the fear by seeing like examples of it going well, right? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, those sort of like negative and traumatic birth experiences can happen, but beautiful births can also happen. And sometimes we just need to be reminded of that.
Got it. I love that. Yeah, we can use the good stories to our advantage, not in a way to compare ourselves and wish that we had that experience instead, but more of hope. And I love that. We have
Hmm.
to be really intentional about how we use social media.
Oh, yeah.
If we're using it kind of mindlessly, we will find ourselves in a lot of the times negative spiral. I mean, I'm speaking for myself here as someone with birth trauma who really
Hmm.
wanted a different experience. I'm just like spitballing questions because I have an expert in front of me. What do you say to people who had birth trauma who if they are not sure if they want to have more kids?
So hard because I mean, I'll just speak personally also. Like, I, in some ways, had a lovely and beautiful birth. I had the home birth that I wanted, and
Yeah.
also I still had birth trauma, right? Like, I still had a
Hmm.
pretty significant uh, laceration experience that required
Hmm.
surgery. I had postpartum preeclampsia, as you know. And so like there's still trauma even in this like really lovely birth experience that I had.
Mm.
And there were fears about getting pregnant again. There still are fears about
Yeah.
eventually getting pregnant again. So I don't know if those fears ever like truly go away. Kind of similar to when you first get pregnant, like you're never really 100% ready, right? And so it's kind of good to just like normalize that and be aware of that, the fact that there may still be some fears and being able to just like voice them if you have a partner that you're, going to get pregnant with, like being able to voice those fears and let those fears like live and breathe and talk to your partner about them can be really helpful so you don't feel like you're just holding them all in. Um, and just like seeking help to see if this is really something that you want to do, right? Like, what are your reasons for wanting to get pregnant? Does it feel like pressure from others or pressure from within yourself for some reason?
Yeah.
Really interrogating whether or not you would be happy with the one kid that you have or what feels like is missing, not as a way to like shame yourself or shame yourself out of having another kid, but really just like trying to better understand your reasoning and where it's coming from, and seeing honestly and quite frankly like if it's worth it, if it's worth pushing through the fear in order to kind of like realize this dream that you have of having another kid. It's kind of just like important interrogation and like self inquiry to do.
Yeah, if we just go into the next one, not processing what has happened in the first birth, I've seen a lot of add-on effects for folks too,
Hmm.
right? It's one of those things, right? Like if you just do it, then you get through it. You're never really truly ready, but it's so important to take the time for that and also with
Hmm.
a mental health provider. So
Yeah.
going back to kind of the structure that I had, and we just have maybe two more questions left, but given your social justice background, I know that's a really important part of your work that you do
Mhm.
with your different identities. How do you see a woman's mental health interacting or intersecting with larger
Hmm.
cultural and systemic issues?
Yeah. I mean, in so many ways, I think that parenting is political, like inherently, and mothering is political. One thing that you may have noticed as we've been talking is that I will tend to actually like not just use mother or just use women, right? Like I talk about women and birthing people, talk about the full spectrum of people who can give birth because there are non-binary people who give birth, there are trans men who give birth, right? And so being inclusive of the whole wide range of perinatal experiences is super important to me. I think that that intersects with a lot of greater social justice issues around just like queer awareness, queer health. I'm thinking of the ways that like suicidality rates are like astronomical levels for like non-binary and trans people because of the ways that they're not seen in their identities. And the perinatal world is kind of like, unfortunately, at the forefront of like not seeing them in their experiences, right? And so that's like one big way that I personally see my work as like more political, is like really like not just being inclusive of trans and non-binary people, but like also like finding ways to center them and their experiences, not as like an add-on or an afterthought, but like this is their experience too. So I think that that's one way that, yeah, just like this is political for me. And then I would also say that just being just like an advocate for maternal and perinatal mental health, perinatal health in general, that is a social justice endeavor and a
Yeah,
political endeavor, right? Like we know what childcare looks like in the United States, right? We know what parental leave looks like in the United States. It is not great. And it's even worse when there's like lack of access, when you're from a marginalized community, depending on where you live, et cetera, right? And so being able to advocate for some of these greater supports for everyone is super important to the health and well-being of people who have kids.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we can go on and on
I
about
know.
this politically, what's coming up in our election and different regions of the country too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
being on the West Coast and being in the cities where we're at too, like it's better here than other places. So I'm really aware of how it is in the South and access to women's care in general. But people who give birth, there's such a, it's almost like you're already a marginalized community if you're giving birth because you're supposed to just do it. And this idea, oh, but everyone else did it before you
Yep.
comes in. I think like there's a, some of the maybe more traditional values or different generations will say like, oh, well, I did it. I suffered. So now it's
Mm-hmm.
your turn. And that I know a lot of that is martyrdom. And also it's a almost like rite of passage. And so
Yeah.
those
Mm-hmm.
are things that I've struggled with in my personal life, but professional life too, because we can really internalize those roles. Like I'm supposed to suffer. And if
Mm-hmm.
I had, if the hill that I will die on is that you don't have to suffer
Yes.
in parenthood, in motherhood, and giving birth and your postpartum. Like that's not your only option. There is a way to
Yeah.
go through this without suffering. And if you are suffering, know that you can get help and you don't deserve to be stuck there either.
Mm-hmm.
You just gosh, people deserve so much better in this experience. And I have some hope because we do see changes. We see people seeking help for that. Like there's just more treatment seeking in general, especially of people of color.
Mm-hmm.
There's pushback as well. And so we have to keep going, got to keep working on this,
Right,
have to keep
right.
advocating. It really doesn't stop. Okay,
It
I love
doesn't.
asking my guests hot takes. Any hot takes on where you think mental health care for people in the perinatal period needs to, I don't know, anything that needs to change or evolve that we need to
Oh my
do?
gosh, that's such a big question because
I
everything
know. I
like
know.
everything needs to change and
Kind of
evolve,
unfair.
honestly, right? I mean, I'm actually interested in the way that you brought up this like idea of a rite of passage because people do think that suffering is a rite of passage. Like suffering is what is necessary and the way
Mm,
to get the family that you want or, to be able to have kids. Like it all involves suffering. And I kind of like want to flip that on its head a little bit and ask like, what if the real rite of passage was healing? Right? Like, what if the real rite of passage was like a pain-free experience or was community care? Like, what if that's what was actually passed down intergenerationally as opposed to the pain and the trauma and the suffering, right?
mhm.
Like, how
Absolutely.
amazing could that be? So yeah, just like kind of thinking about that instead. Like, how do we create a different experience for the next generation if we've experienced the trauma? And that like this is not just for perinatal health, right? This is like for
Exactly.
like inner child work. This is for like all of it,
Totally.
right? Like how do we create a different experience and pass down an experience that is more healed than the experience that came before us? I think that that would be beautiful. That would be an amazing
Mhm.
sort of like change to what we've experienced for years.
Wow, I got teary-eyed.
Hmm.
It's like things that I know, but I want so badly to be more integrated into my life, into the people around me. I find myself getting really protective of when I find out that I have a friend who just got pregnant. I find this like almost like maternal instinct to say like, yeah, are you getting enough support? Are the people around you going to be
Hmm.
there for you? How can I help you? Here's these resources. I have to like step back a little bit because also trusting their experience and trusting
Hmm.
their resources, and they're the hero of their own story as well. But
Hmm.
I think so much of it is also trying to like heal from my own experience and also
Yeah.
from just what a rough time it was and how fast it all went by. And so I think that every time I'm working on advocating or researching or talking with my friends about this, I have to really remember that like this journey for myself, as similar as it is to everyone else, it's the healing process is going to be a little bit more
Yeah.
unique. I think that's
Hmm.
really helpful to remember too, that that's my rite of passage, just like everyone
Yeah.
else's healing journey. And so I appreciate you sharing this. If there was one message or a piece of advice or just takeaway that you wish more people who are going to give birth, who are planning to give birth, knew, especially during pregnancy, postpartum,
Hmm.
what would that be?
Yeah. I think that what is really important for me to share with people, with anybody who's, pregnant or postpartum, but especially my clients, is that what you're going through is real and is valid and may be due to hormones, may be due to a lot of things internally. But at the same time, a lot of it is systemic. And I think that that's important to name because a lot of people can feel like, oh, this is me. Like there's something wrong with me. And a lot of times it's like, no, it's actually not something
Mm,
that's wrong with you. It's something wrong with the way that the system is set up. It's almost set up for us to
mm,
fail, right? Like we
hmm.
kind of already went into a little bit about, you
Yeah.
know, medical leave or parental leave. We talked a little bit about like childcare and the state of childcare in the United States, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the ways that we in the US are more individual, like individualistic than communal. And like for me, as someone whose parents are from Congo, which is like a very community oriented, like collectivistic culture, it's just like so different here, right? And like if I was in a place that was more community oriented, where we're actually like co-parenting with our neighbors, with each other, so much of the depression and anxiety and things that I felt would not have existed, or maybe like would have at least been lessened, right? Because I
Hmm.
would have had that support, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and so just like the ways that the system set up to fail us, to put us in these positions where, yeah, we are exhausted and we do have to go back to work when we're not getting any sleep and we're depressed and we're alone. Like, it's almost like, oh, well, of course you feel depressed. Of course you feel suicidal. Like, look at the system that you're in. So, kind of just like wanting to name that for folks. Like, yes, you are going through something and you're going through something very real and it's like manifesting in your body in real ways. And it's not you that's the problem. It's the system that's the problem.
Wow. It's so important to give ourselves grace during this too. And for anyone who is going through this, remembering that one, you're not alone. It sounds so cheesy, but truly, like, this is not something you have to do by yourself. There are
Hmm.
people there for you who will accept and love you during this. And I love thinking about your own healing journey too. Thank you so much for your time on this.
Hmm.
Where can people find you? What's your website? I am in love with your social media page right now because
Oh,
the
thank you.
videos, I resonate probably too much with them. And yeah, so are you taking
Hmm.
new clients? Other
Yeah.
resources that you're a fan of?
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. So you can find me at my website, which is itstheMamaSpace.com, or on Instagram, it's .theMamaSpace. And mama stands for maternal and mental awareness. It's kind of a little bit of a
I
pun
love it.
there.
I remember when you told me, and I was like, "This is so good. You've had this for a while, and it's so creative."
Right. And yes, I am accepting new clients. I was previously working in hospital settings doing some therapy with new moms and new parents there, and I recently opened up my own private practice. So I am open and willing to accept new clients in California. So you can go ahead and find me either, yeah, on my website or on Instagram.
Do you do coaching as well?
I
Does that extend
do.
to people in different states?
Yeah.
Okay,
So my
cool.
therapy services are for people within California, but my
Okay, cool.
coaching services are for people nationwide.
That's
So I
great.
do coaching and education for childbirth and postpartum. So really walking people through the whole experience, what they can expect, and just like how to prepare themselves, their families, and their communities for birth and postpartum, as well as some lactation education and coaching also.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much to our listeners. Thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions, reach out to both of us. We are here for you. We love you. We hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.